Welcome, everyone. You are in the right place for the Shifting Landscapes panel tonight. We're going to give a few minutes to allow everyone to log on, and we'll get started no later than 6:05 Central Time. Welcome, folks. You are in the right place for the Shifting Landscapes panel. We're going to give it a few more minutes for folks to log on. We'll get started no later than 6:05 Central. Hello, folks who are still logging in. You're in the right place for the Shifting Landscapes panel. We are going to get started soon. I'm just giving people time to log on, but we'll get started no later than 6:05. Hi, Linda. I see a few people we know among the attendees. All right, so I think the logons have slowed down a little, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome, everybody. My name is Dr. Amy Katherine Medvick, and I'm the Director of Educational Programming here at Hermann-Grima and Gallier Historic Houses. For those who are new to us, Hermann-Grima and Gallier Historic Houses, managed by the Women's Exchange, preserves two 19th century New Orleans homes and, through their architecture, collections, and history, inspires discourse about our collective past and its relevance to our present and future. It is my immense honor to welcome you all tonight to introduce the Shifting Landscapes virtual tour and celebrate the culmination of a project spanning 5 years and two hurricanes. This virtual tour, titled Shifting Landscapes: Slavery in the Built Environment, explores slavery at Gallier House, located in the French Quarter neighborhood of New Orleans. James Gallier Jr. and his wife Agle Villavaso enslaved several people. This tour focuses on four who lived and worked at Gallier House: Lorette, a woman in her early 40s who likely worked as a lady's maid for Mrs. Gallier; Rose, a woman in her early 20s who may have worked as the cook; and a brother and sister in their late teens named Francois and Julien. The brief historical period depicted in this tour, from 1860 when the house was completed to the end of the Civil War in 1865, was on the eve of the abolition of slavery. The virtual tour features 360-degree panoramic and 2D images of each indoor and outdoor space currently on view at the historic property, and around 150 interactive points of interest, including text, images, videos, and 3D models of some of the objects in the Gallier House collection. The tour engages deeply with not only the history of slavery in the city and on the property, but the distinct interrelationship between architecture, material culture, and the system of enslavement, both how the built environment shaped and reinforced this system, and also how enslaved people engaged with and sometimes subverted an environment designed to oppress them. The tour highlights the theme of shifting landscapes, not only the ways in which the physical spaces of the house meant different things to different people at different times, but also the many ways in which the social landscape shifted for enslaved people during this brief but tumultuous period in history. The tour also challenges us in the present day to shift our ways of thinking about the history of the landscapes, both physical and metaphorical, that we have inherited today. In tonight's virtual program, you'll briefly hear from a few of our project collaborators, including Gaynell Brady of our Mammies, Dr. Walter Greason, DeWitt Wallace Professor of History at Macalester College, Dr. Leslie Harris, Professor of History and Black Studies at Northwestern University, and Mr. Leon Waters, historian, publisher, social activist, and manager of Hidden History, LLC. We'll also hear from our curator, Katie Burlison, and board member and education committee chair, Dr. Angel Parham, also associate professor of sociology at the University of Virginia. We'll also have a Q&A at the end of the panel, so please post your questions in the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen for us there. Before I turn things over to our panelists, I'd like to acknowledge the hard work of all those who contributed to this massive project. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge our generous funders. The Shifting Landscape, Slavery in the Built Environment virtual tour was made possible by major grants from the National Endowment for the Humanities, Democracy Demands Wisdom, and the Institute of Museum and Library Services Museums for America grant. Any views, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this tour do not necessarily represent those of the National Endowment for the Humanities or the Institute of Museum and Library Services. I'd also like to acknowledge the support of the International Coalition of Sites of Conscience, who, through selecting our organization to participate in their Addressing the Silences Community Partnership Toolkit project, provided both financial support and wisdom and guidance in building our partnership with Gaynell Brady of Our Mammies, who then became an important collaborator on the videos for the Shifting Landscapes project. I'd like to thank former Executive Director Tessa Jagger, our curator, Katie Burlison, here tonight on the panel, and our former Director of Educational Programming, Dr. Anastasia Scott, who originally conceived of this project back in 2020. I was immensely lucky to step into such an amazing project that had already been expertly planned by these three. I'd also like to thank our curatorial associate, Peter Dandridge, for his assistance with the creation of the database of enslaved individuals, an important early stage part of this project that helped lay the foundation upon which this interpretation was built. A big thank you goes to all our tech whizzes who helped build this visually beautiful tour. 360-degree panoramic and 2D image capture of Gallier House and the digital assembly of the tour was completed by Brandon Hall of Hall Films. Volumetric scanning and 3D model rendering of collection items was completed by Dr. Brian Carter, Director of the Center for Digital Humanities at University of Arizona, and with the assistance of Amelia Latania Matheson, Ernest Jerome Walker, and Cosmo Vittorio Brusa Zappellini. Videography and editing of our video content was completed by Brandon Baudier of Inflicted Media. Additional thanks goes to Nathan Dutois for his assistance in getting the tour up on our website and ongoing content updates. I would like to thank and acknowledge all of our brilliant project collaborators who with immense wisdom and immense patience worked together to develop the content for the tour. Firstly, I'd like to thank Dr. Del Upton, Professor Emeritus of Architectural History at the University of California, Los Angeles, who was a collaborator in the first stages of this project. I'd also like to thank all the scholars who worked on content development, writing, and editing for this project. In addition to the collaborators present here on this panel tonight, Dr. Walter Greason, Dr. Leslie Harris, and Mr. Leon Waters, I would like to thank and acknowledge the hard work and invaluable insights of Dr. Fallon Samuels-Idu, Assistant Professor of Real Estate and Historic Preservation at Tulane University, Dr. Brian Carter, Professor of Africana Studies and Director of the Center for Digital Humanities at University of Arizona, Dr. Clifton Ellis, Elizabeth Sasser Professor of Architectural History at Texas Tech University, Dr. Aaron M. Greenwald, historian and founder of the Working Historian LLC, Dr. Lewis P. Nelson, Professor of Architectural History at University of Virginia, Dr. Arijit Sen, Associate Professor in the Department of History and Urban Studies program at University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, and Brooke Tesler, MPS, Founding Principal and Architectural Historian, Tesler Preservation Consulting, LLC. Finally, a huge thank you goes to Gaynell Brady of Our Mammy's LLC, also here tonight, who not only appears as the host and narrator of the tour's video content, but was also instrumental in bringing the vision for the videos into focus. Finally, I would like to thank the museum staff and board members, past and present, who have contributed to this project in countless smaller ways. Your dedication to critical, honest history has been an ongoing inspiration and makes work like this virtual tour project possible. Now, finally, I would like to turn things over to our panelists. I'd like to first introduce Board Member and Education Committee Chair, Dr. Angel Parham. Angel Adams Parham is Associate Professor of Sociology at the University of Virginia. Her research is in the historical and comparative historical sociology of race, with comparative focus on 18th and 19th century Francophone and Anglophone America. She is the author of American Roots, Racial Palimpsests and the Transformation of Race, which examines change in race and racialization in New Orleans under the French, Spanish, and Anglo-American administrations. The book has received several awards. Angel has been a member of the Hermann-Grima and Gallier House Board since 2021, where she has enjoyed serving on the Education Committee. With that, Angel, I'll let you take it away.
Thank you so much, Amy. It has indeed been a pleasure and a privilege to serve on the board, and I'm very excited to share with our audience what we've done with the Shifting Landscapes tour. And so I am going to share my screen so that you can see what it looks like. So this gives you the view of the front of the Gallier House, and you'll see that there are so many ways that you can get into the tour. So you can go here and look at the exteriors, the ground floor, and the upper floor. And so what I'm going to do is to lead you through just a few of these to kind of orient your sense of how to move through the house and to give a little bit of the historical context. The focus here is on enslaved people and how they would have experienced the house, but it's also to help us today to read the landscape differently. It can be very easy to walk down the street or walk through even a historic house and not really, kind of imagine what the lives of the people would have been like 100 years ago, 200 years ago. And so this idea of shifting landscapes is to help us to, kind of shift our understanding of both physical and metaphorical landscapes. So I'm going to start here. So this photo of an enslaved woman with the children of the Gallier family, we think may have been Lorette, who acted as a nursemaid to the Gallier's children. I will not say a lot about Lorette because Dr. Harris, who is here, will give us a more in-depth portrait of Lorette's life. But what you can see is that you've got the picture here, and then if you click here on the eye, it will give you more information about who we think this is and a little bit about what her life might have been. So it seems likely that Lorette was considered to be a wedding gift to Aglaé, the woman of the house when Lorette was working there. And, this idea of being a gift, a person being a gift is something that is really important to us today. But it wouldn't have been uncommon at the time. Often, people can think about, well, those enslaved people who were in urban areas, in houses, perhaps they had an easier life. That's something that is often talked about or assumed. But one of the things that many scholars have unveiled in that, some of the existing slave narratives that we have unveiled, is how difficult it was, especially as an enslaved woman, to really maintain control over one's bodily integrity. And in particular, enslaved women had to worry quite often about predatory advances from the white men in the household. One of the slave narratives that we have that has come down to us from Harriet Jacobs gives us an intimate look at what that situation would have been like. And I want to read just a little bit from Harriet Jacobs as she talks about the situation and how she tried to deal with it, living in very close quarters. She writes, I now entered on my 15th year, a sad epoch in the life of a slave girl. My master began to whisper foul words in my ear. Young as I was, I could not remain ignorant of their import. He was a crafty man and resorted to many means to accomplish his purposes. Sometimes he had stormy, terrific ways that made his victims tremble. Sometimes he assumed a gentleness that he thought must surely subdue. He tried his utmost to corrupt the pure principles my grandmother had instilled, but he was my master. I was compelled to live under the same roof with him, where I saw a man 40 years my senior, daily violating the most sacred commandments of nature. He told me I was his property, that I must be subject to his will in all things. My soul revolted against the mean tyranny, but where could I turn for protection? The mistress who ought to protect the helpless victim has no other feelings towards her but those of jealousy and rage. My master met me at every turn, reminding me that I belonged to him, and swearing by heaven and earth that he would compel me to submit to him. The other slaves in my master's house noticed the change. Many of them pitied me, but none dared to ask the cause. They had no need to inquire. They knew too well the guilty practices under that roof, and they were aware that to speak of them was an offense that never went unpunished. So that gives us a firsthand sense of some of the difficulties that Black women who were enslaved might have encountered when they were living under the roof of a white male master. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go into the courtyard using these arrows. And we're first going to visit the back service stairs. So what you see here is the stairway that would have been used by enslaved people. Lorette would have been going up and down them. Um, Others in the household, Rose the cook would have been going up and down them. Imagine carrying very hot water up and down for various different kinds of tasks. And one of the contrasts that we bring out in this tour is really taking a look at what the daily life of the enslaved person was compared to the members of the Gallier family. So keep this image in mind. Very plain, simple stairs, very utilitarian. And then we're going to go here and we're going to go in contrast to the main staircase that would have been used by the Gallier family and their guests. And what we see here is beautiful wool carpeting, a beautiful polished mahogany handrail, right? Beautiful colors. It's really vibrant and attractive. And one of the things that we may not always remember or think about is the impact of beauty or the deprivation of beauty in the lives of enslaved people. Beauty truly matters. And so here we are back at the service staircase. And so we're also going to go then to see where Lorette and others in the house would have gone. So you have this underneath the staircase. All of the action where enslaved people are doing the work that supports the house is what we might think of as kind of backstage. There's this kind of front stage area like those stairs that we just saw. And then there's all this backstage labor that has to happen in order for the house to run well. And enslaved people were the ones keeping that going. So here we would go into the storeroom and you'll see the different objects there. Here is the salt box. Here we see preserved foods and then all of the labor that would have had to be done in order to preserve those foods. Um, so making jams and jellies, drying, preserving, salting, pickling, all of that in order to keep food fresh would have fallen on the shoulders of enslaved people. So we're going to go back now and go toward the kitchen. So this kitchen has many features that were quite impressive for the day. One that I will point out here is the copper boiler. So the Galliers were unusual for their time in having hot water that was piped right into the bathroom. And so there was, however, a potential danger associated with this. So water would be heated on the range here and then stored in this copper boiler, and then steam pressure would push it into the bathroom. However, if too much pressure built up, there was the danger of it exploding. And so, what you would have to do then is to periodically release the pressure by turning on the hot water. But if it did explode, the first line that would be injured would be the enslaved people who are working in the kitchen. There are many items here that you can click on. Whenever you see a dot or an eye, you can get more information. Later on, Katie will show you some of the 3D images, which are very exciting. Here, I will focus on the sugar cone. And so sugar is one of those crops that enslaved people raised in Louisiana as well as throughout the Caribbean, a particularly grueling crop to cultivate, to bring in, to process. It could routinely take nearly 24-hour shifts in order to get the sugar cane in and process it in time before it spoils. So it was very backbreaking labor. But here you see it when it's all finished and ready to be used by those who are privileged to have it. So I'm going to end my time by reflecting on the kitchen and reflecting on some work by Jessica B. Harris, High on the Hog. So this is a book that she's written. She's an African American cultural historian focused on culinary history. You may have heard of the Netflix show by the same name, High on the Hog. And I'm going to draw from the end of the introduction that Jessica Harris writes, because I think it ends us on a note to see how African American people were empowered and how they came into their own. And so she ends with this story just before she launches into the rest of the book. Old Master killed about 40 or 50 hogs every year. He had John to help him. When he was ready to pay him off, he said, "John, here's your pig head and pig feet and pig ears." John said, "Thank you, boss." So John killed hogs for about 5 years that way. That's what he got for his pay. Then John moved on back of the place and got himself 3 hogs. Old Master didn't even know he had a hog. Next winter at hog killing time, Old Master went down after John. Old Master says, "John." John comes to the door. "Yes, sir." Old Master says, "Be down to the house early in the morning. I want to kill hogs. Be there about 5:30. John asks, "Well, Old Master, what you paying?" "I'll pay you like I always did. I'll give you the head and all the ears and all the pig's feet and all the tails." John said, "Well, Old Master, I can't because I'm eating higher on the hog than that now. I got 3 hogs of my own and I eat spare ribs, backbone, pork chops, Midland ham, and everything else. I eat high on the hog now." So I will leave it there and pass it on to our next panelist.
All right. Thank you so much, Angel. Um, for that overview. And thank you as well for your guidance and support this last year as Education Committee Chair, and your vision in shepherding this project through these final stages. You brought a lot of clarity, especially to the planning of the launch program and our plans for the virtual tour in the future. And I'm incredibly grateful for that. So thank you so much, Angel. All right, next we will hear from Mr. Leon A. Waters, historian, publisher, social activist, and manager of Hidden History LLC. Mr. Waters is a New Orleans native and serves as the board chairperson of the Louisiana Museum of African American History. As a licensed tour host, where he directs tours on hidden history, Mr. Waters is also the manager of Hidden History LLC, a publishing, touring, and research company. He has published the book On to New Orleans, Louisiana's Heroic 1811 Slave Revolt, documenting the story of the largest slave revolt in the United States that happened in St. John the Baptist, St. Charles, and Orleans parishes. And Mr. Waters' camera is not working for him tonight, so you won't be able to see his face, but we are going to pull up a map that relates to the comments that he will share with us. So with that, Mr. Waters, if you would like to take it away.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much. I'd like to begin by stating that in discussing the life of the James Gallier House, I'd like to share that we are fortunate to have copies of the first Black-owned newspaper in the South, called La Union. This paper provides us with a documented picture of the French Quarter and its surroundings in the early 1860s, when the Gallier House was constructed and completed in 1860. La Union was published from 1862 to 1864. There were about 150 issues of La Union published in the French language 3 days a week, product of intellectually brilliant Haitian descendants. The founder, editor, and writers were mostly of the mixed racial ancestry, Creoles. The founder, Dr. Louis Charles Roudanet, and writers were influenced by the progressive ideals and themes of the French bourgeois democratic revolution of 1848, liberty, equality, fraternity. Roudanet and company were the middle-class section of the Black population. A section of this Creole population sympathized with those below them, while another section strived to be like the white oppressor class, owning slaves themselves. This progressive section fought for citizenship and enfranchisement, the right to vote. The Union newspaper provided a picture of the class struggle occurring at that time in history, and also the philosophical struggle taking place in the world. This was a period when the overthrow of the feudalist system was underway, and the rise of the capitalist system was progressing. At the same time, the ideas of socialism, utopian socialist ideas were being introduced. So the newspaper, La Union, had a utopian socialist foundation. The newspaper had several locations in the French Quarter. Its last address was 21 Contage Street, which today is 2527 Contage Street, walking distance from the James Gallier House, as well as the Hermann-Grima House. I had the opportunity to visit the Gallier House. I measured the bedroom of Lorette, one of the enslaved residents. It measured about 120 square feet. I also measured the enslaver's James Gallier family bedroom. That room was over 500 square feet, 4 times that of Laureate. When I added the study, the living room, the dining room, and the wine room, the enslaver's space was over 2,000 square feet, or 10 times the space of Laureate. This did not include the bathroom. The life of the Gallier family was far more comfortable, happier, and protected by law than that of the enslaved-owned residents of the Gallier family. This was the evidence I obtained as a result of by measuring the various rooms in the James Gallier's house. One can only imagine the excitement and joy received by the enslaved and the progressive section of the free people of color when the La Union newspaper reported on the capture of New Orleans on April 29, 1862, officially May 1st, 1862, by Union General Benjamin Butler in the Civil War, as well as the sadness of learning of the killing of the famous Captain Andre Caillou of the Louisiana Native Guards at the Battle of Port Hudson in May 1863. I would hope that a truthful and accurate story of the Gallier House should be told by white, dedicated enthusiasts who speak with intentionality and integrity. In closing, I would hope that the narration and the future narrators will meet the demands of the moment, a serious, accurate, and truthful story of the James Gallier House. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Waters. Your crucial provocations, and especially how you championed including the story of L'Union newspaper in the tour narrative, kept our work honest and incisive, and ensured that we were able to include Black voices from historical sources in our tour, one of the greatest challenges when working from the history of people who have been marginalized in the historical archive. And I'm so grateful for your contributions to this project. Thank you. All right, next up we have Dr. Leslie Harris. Leslie Harris is Professor of History and Black Studies at Northwestern University. She has authored or co-edited 5 books and participated in a number of public history projects, including the award-winning Slavery in New York exhibition at the New York Historical Society and the accompanying book with Ira Berlin, and the reinterpretation of the urban slave quarters at Telfair Museum's Owens Thomas House in Savannah, Georgia, which included the edited volume Slavery and Freedom in Savannah. Harris is currently completing Leaving New Orleans, A Personal Urban History, a book that combines memoir with family, urban, and environmental histories to explore the multiple meanings of New Orleans from its founding through its uncertain future amid climate change.
Good evening, everyone, and it's been my pleasure to work with the Gallier House, with my colleagues, some of whom are on this with us this evening, and I just want to thank everyone who's contributed to this. I personally have learned so much more about New Orleans through this history. In the antebellum era, In the antebellum era, New Orleans was the capital of urban enslavement in the United States, both as the leading slave trading center of the South and as the leading port for the transportation of products produced by enslaved people. But for much of the 20th century, those realities were ignored in history books, and the French Quarter, the site of numerous slave trading locations and urban slave quarters behind homes, romanticized this horrific history. Real estate agents marketed those former slave quarters as apartments, especially as prices spiraled upwards. When some of these homes became historic museums, these slave quarters again had their histories obscured as gift shops or as the orientation location for what many thought was the main event, the fancy homes that enslavers lived in, ate, slept, and entertained. Visitors came to such homes imagining their lives sitting in fancy rooms, eating elaborate meals, sleeping in opulent bedrooms, all without thinking about the enslaved labor that made this luxury possible. Today, Gallier House and other house museums have taken on the task of recovering the original histories of the slave quarters and interpreting these homes as spaces of labor for enslaved people of African descent. Enslaved people and their enslavers live close together and yet experience the same spaces very differently. If we focus in on Lorette, who we believe is pictured in this photograph, the most senior enslaved person in the household, we have a sense of how the lives of enslaved people and the lives of the enslavers were deeply intertwined and yet vastly unequal. Lorette was a wedding gift to Mrs. Gallier, a common practice among wealthy slave-owning families. Aglier Villavasso Gallier would have been raised to manage a household like Gallier House, which would also have meant knowing how to manage enslaved domestic servants. Lorette was probably in her late 30s and probably highly skilled by the time she was purchased for Mrs. Gallier as her personal servant and as nursemaid to the Gallier children. Along with the other enslaved people, Francois, Rose, and Julienne, Laurette would have been responsible for the personal needs and desires of the white enslavers 24 hours a day. I want to show you we're in the upstairs balcony area. If we look towards the Gallier slave living quarters, we're looking along the balcony where enslaved peoples lived and where their rooms face. It's a very narrow balcony. The rooms don't have a lot of cross ventilation. And you can see in the distance the wider balcony and the much larger windows that represent the Gallier living quarters. And now this is the view away from, on the right, away from the Gallier's living quarters. And right here would be Laurette's room, and right here would be the dirty clothes room. And then past those two doorways and the doorway to downstairs would be Francois's room and Juliette and Rose's room. And I'm going to come back and talk about that in a moment. Laurette may have been instructed to bring Mrs. Gallier her coffee and breakfast in bed, and this is the opulent bedroom where the Galliers lived. She probably helped her every day with her toilette in terms of her washing and getting dressed. She made up the bed and kept the private rooms of the Galliers clean and comfortable. When there were visitors to the home, Laurette may have overseen the production of refreshments or full meals as directed by Mrs. Gallier, and she may have overseen the service of those meals. Enslaved cooks may have learned basic reading and math skills, but because of the laws against literacy, many of them may not have, and they would have had to hold in their heads hundreds of recipes. If Mrs. Gallier wanted her cook to learn a new recipe, she may have read it to her, and the enslaved cook would have to remember it. I'm showing you here the children's play set, and we think about playing as something that is, fun for young children, but these play sets, and particularly this small stove, which has pots and all kinds of things on it, and then this tea set. As a child, as I said before, Mrs. Gallier would have been taught how to take care of, how to manage, her household. And that instruction would have happened from a very young age. Similarly, we see in this representation of the Gallier Children's House the same instruction being passed down to them. The women enslavers in these households had to know how everything worked so that they could properly instruct and discipline the enslaved laborers under their control. Now, we're back at the intersection between the Gallier living space on the left, and you can just see the doorway, and then the enslaved quarters on the right. And I want you to note that Laurette's bedroom, where that first arrow is right here, is in between the living quarters of the Galliers and the laboring rooms upstairs and downstairs where the enslaved worked, as well as the bedrooms of the enslaved people. Next door to Laurette's bedroom is the dirty clothes room. Bedding, clothing, and other items to be laundered would have been kept there until wash day. Any small repairs to clothing would have been taken care of by Laurette, probably at this sewing machine that's all the way in the back of this room. On wash day, all of the clothing for the week would have been brought down to this courtyard that you can just see to the right of the balcony and down those stairs that we saw earlier. Tubs full of water, irons, and other items would have been brought to the courtyard. The tubs would have been filled with water there. Washing was often done by hand in large tubs, and clothes would then have been hung to dry, and ironing with hot, heavy irons would have been completed in the courtyard. And this would be 7 days of, 24, not 24 hours a day, weekly, every week of the year. This is not something that you could delay. So no matter how hot it was or how cold it was, this work had to be done, and it largely would have been done outdoors. Doing laundry would have been much more highly skilled also than we think of today. The person who was in charge of washing the very elaborate 19th century clothes would have had to know how to iron, how much heat to use, what kinds of soaps to use to preserve and clean the fabric. Now, if we go back to Laurette's room, Her room contains some items that may mark her higher status. Notice the four-poster bed, the hip bath here, that if she were to use it, she probably also took it downstairs and filled it with water there, and other items for herself. Now, it's typical for urban enslaved people in general to have nicer clothing and furniture than was true in rural plantation areas, but that's just another way for enslavers to signal their wealth. And of course, these items, as we already saw, don't compare at all to those of the enslaver family. In addition, Laurette would have had only a relatively brief time to rest in her bed. The rocker, which is not pictured here but is part of this room, might have provided her with a seat as she repaired by hand the garments that the child enslavers tore during play or that they were slowly out or quickly outgrowing. Perhaps Laurette was responsible as well for using cheaper fabrics to make clothing for herself and other enslaved laborers in the household. At any time, a bell or a knock on the door from one of the enslavers could have interrupted her or other enslaved laborers to attend to a more immediate task, an unexpected visitor to attend to, a sick child who's made a mess. Perhaps Laurette would have to wake Francois from sleep in the night to fetch the doctor to come to take care of someone who was ill. Enslaved laborers looked at what we think of as the most beautiful parts of the home with a different eye than their enslavers or than many of us today. These elaborate furnishings and decorations take detailed cleaning on a daily, weekly, monthly, or seasonally basis. The house would be thoroughly cleaned with a change of seasons, as curtains and rugs would be changed out to reflect the needs of cold or hot weather. Deep cleaning would also happen, and inspection of items for wear and tear at that time. The weekly and daily cleaning of visible items and also household decorations were also necessary. And I'd have you look at this molding, this very elaborate molding around the ceiling. And in my case, when I entered these rooms and thought about enslaved labor, the first thing I thought was, who is on a ladder cleaning the dust out of the crevices of this kind of molding very carefully? That's just one example, but everything in this home would have to be very carefully cleaned and attended to. These beautiful items made life comfortable and beautiful for enslavers, but entailed light or heavy labor for enslaved people, and without a doubt, a never-ending attentiveness on their part. Oops. Outside the house, Laurette in particular would have accompanied Mrs. Gallier and the children when they visited relatives outside of New Orleans, or perhaps if they took longer trips to other cities or states to escape the summer heat or yellow fever or malarial epidemics. As far as we know, Laurette did not have a family or children of her own. This was often a pattern for urban enslaved people because enslavers did not necessarily have the space for non-working children or extraneous, in their minds, spouses to live in these urban slave quarters, which were smaller than the acreage of rural plantations. If Laurette did have a spouse or children, they may have lived with other enslavers in the city or even on rural plantations. In either case, she would have had to obtain permission to see them, and that would have been hard to schedule around her duties to those who owned her, as well as those who owned her family members. Gallier House's restoration of and reinterpretation of these quarters reminds us that this kind of intimacy between enslaver and enslaved did not necessarily breed love or comfort. For survival, Laurette may have had an incredibly detailed knowledge of the Gallier family's needs and desires, their joys and sorrows. Whether or not the Galliers knew or cared about her desires, joys, and sorrows is unclear and was certainly not a requirement of owning another human being as property. The primary goal of the relationship between enslaver and enslaved was the production of comfort and wealth for the person who owned the slave. Nothing more. Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie. As is clear from Leslie's comments, she came to this project with a seemingly tireless patience in constantly bringing the team back to our core focus, telling the story of Laurette, Rose, Julien, and Francois, and getting that story right down to every last detail of our language. Every word in this tour is more powerful because of it. Thank you, Leslie. All right, next we will hear from our curator, Katie Burlison. Katie Burlison is a native of Mobile, Alabama, with deep Louisiana roots. Katie is passionate about preservation, drawing on material culture and primary source documents to interpret the lives of 19th century New Orleanians, especially those who have been left out of the traditional historical narrative. In 2022, her exhibition Artistry in Iron, Blacksmiths of New Orleans was awarded the American Association for State and Local Histories Leadership in History Award. She holds a BA in French from the University of Virginia and an MA in the study of decorative arts, design, and culture from the Bard Graduate Center in New York City. All right, Katie, take it away.
Hi, everybody. Okay. First, I want to thank Amy so much for her coordination and administration of this multi-year effort, very substantial multi-year effort. She administrated multiple grants and kept us all on track, which is a lot of work with the number of advisors and staff involved. So I want to thank the advisors, especially those here tonight, for being willing to sign on to this in-depth project and give their expertise and attention. It's been a professional highlight of mine and a learning experience for me as a historian, curator, and writer, an architectural school dropout, to be amongst them. In a small museum like ours, especially an historic house museum that also deals with ongoing maintenance of 200-year-old buildings, it's rare to get the chance to take on such an in-depth and meaningful project as this. We've got something special here with shifting landscapes. So, as Amy mentioned, I'm the curator of both Hermann-Grima House and Gallier House, where my primary responsibility is to collect, document, interpret, and care for the artifacts in the collection. For the purposes of this project and tonight's conversation, of course, we'll focus only on the objects at Gallier House. And thanks to Leslie's wonderful presentation with lots of pictures, you have a good idea of what spaces are covered, what they looked like, and what types of labor would have been done within them. And the relationship of Lorette and the other enslaved individuals to those spaces is really the focus of the project in general. So our collection comprises art, furniture, decorative arts, decorative objects, books, jewelry, clothing, and of course, tools and equipment for cooking, sewing, cleaning, and serving. Many, in fact, most of the furniture and furnishings on display at Gallier House, including those we feature in Shifting Landscapes, are representative of the time, socioeconomic level, cultural heritage, and taste of the Galliers, but were not owned or used personally by them or by Lorette, Rose, Julian, or Francois. That's an important notation, but I want to, at the heart of what we are doing here is, and what I do is to use extant material culture, such as buildings, even including the buildings, pictures, papers, and objects to connect the past with the present and the future. To tap into universal emotions experienced by Lorette and all of us here: pride, sadness, grief, excitement, fear. When collecting for the museum in the 1970s and beyond, curatorial staff consulted household inventories, including that of James Gallier Jr.'s estate when he died in 1868, and other archival documents from the mid-19th century to furnish this house with as much accuracy as possible. Yet, as you probably are aware, most of these archival materials were written by and reflect the perspectives of 3 white men, so they fail to tell the full story. The challenge, as Amy mentioned earlier, with the interpretation of Lorette's experience is the same as with many historic sites of enslavement: the dearth of material culture that remains to shed light on and attempt to tell the stories of those individuals who were enslaved and whose lives, their mobility, opportunities, and access were therefore limited and largely controlled by those in power, particularly their enslavers. Shifting landscapes is part of the museum's ongoing work to address these historical insufficiencies. So the advanced technology and the specific skill set of this talented group of advisors and contractors has widened this interpretive lens and expanded our ability to interpret the house, its people, and its spaces. The Shifting Landscapes virtual experience allows us to provide the public with a breadth and depth of information beyond an in-person visit. And it provides a way for those who can't be here physically to access that information. So whether you're in a classroom in Oregon or, across the world in a university, or just in general, somebody who's looking to learn more about their ancestors' experiences in New Orleans, and just get an idea of what interiors looked like at the time and how people interacted with the spaces. You are in control of this project. You are in control on this website. So unlimited by time and physical space, you can stay in one room, or as Amy's shown you in this tour, you can explore all the captured spaces. Click on the arrows and POIs in whatever order you choose, and enlarge and even see an object from all angles. So you'll see these small icons, and I think Angel had already pointed this out, and I'll just reiterate the small icons that are dotted throughout the spaces that have these dots. They have they lead you to additional information, including text descriptions, images, sound clips, videos, and here is an example of one of our 3D models. This is a plate warmer, so you can see all the way around it. An exceptional feature of this project is the 3D modeling of 13 artifacts. This part of the project was spearheaded by Dr. Brian Carter, who unfortunately couldn't be here tonight, but as Amy noted in her intro, Dr. Carter is the director of the Center for Digital Humanities and a professor in Africana Studies at the University of Arizona. When we chose the objects for 3D modeling, we were guided by the current technology available to us and the object's relationship to Laurette's daily life. The technology works better with some objects than others. It doesn't work as well with shiny surfaces or complicated designs. So that was part of the process that sometimes you might not see here. Thinking of what we've been able to show you, there's many more things that we wouldn't work as well 3D. So these utilitarian objects often had more of a dull, unadorned surface and were comprised of fewer parts, so they are ideal for the modeling. On the screen, Amy's showing you a few examples of modeling that Dr. Carter and his students, Amelia, EJ, and Cosmo, captured on their visit to New Orleans. In some instances, they captured two versions of one object type, one used by the enslaved person and the other by the enslaver. For example, you're seeing Laurette's water pitcher and bowl here in her bedroom. And then we're going to compare that to Mrs. Gallier's water pitcher on her washstand. See, this one is more adorned with its painting, its gilt paint. And again, this is not necessarily, we couldn't really do one that had a lot more gilding on it, or it would be too reflective, but oh yeah, there it comes. Okay, but you can see in general that this is a higher level, more expensive object than what Laurette would have in her space. So that reinforces the comparison and contrast, reinforces the different lived experiences of people coexisting in the same house, just like the two staircases that Angel described and showed you pictures of. Yes. So again, it's the porcelain versus the stoneware, or yeah. Okay, viewing objects in 3 dimensions gives us an additional appreciation for their size, sharp edges, delicate components, awkward and sometimes unmanageable shapes and complicated mechanics. These were daily considerations of Laurette and others when laboring for the Gallier family. And Leslie, I appreciate your explanations of those and how talking about how the laborers would have been interacting with the spaces and the objects. And that's a really top goal of this project. So coincidentally, I wanted to say while we were in the research and editing process for Shifting Landscapes, our neighbors at the Historic New Orleans Collection acquired a large Gallier family archival collection, which has already revealed more details about 19th century life at Gallier House. There are references to the monetary value James Gallier Jr. placed upon Rose and Laurette and how he described them physically, the women's roles and primary tasks within the household, and the level of mobility they were afforded during their enslavement here. One account book in that collection provided the basis for our current temporary exhibition, which the Gallier family in New Orleans, a snapshot of urban domestic life, 1850 to 55. So we invite you to come see that at Gallier House. And between that and the in-person tour and this Shifting Landscapes, you'll really have a well-rounded idea of the time period and our topics. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Katie. In addition to Katie's initial groundwork in helping to plan out this project, write our successful grant applications, and contribute to the research and writing, Katie also spent many hours editing our final text, bringing the many disparate voices of all the contributors into harmony. Thank you, Katie. Okay. So next up, we have Dr. Walter D. Greason, DeWitt Wallace Professor of History at Macalester College. Walter Greason, PhD, is the preeminent historian of Afrofuturism, the Black speculative arts, and digital economies in the world today. His work as a viral engagement coordinator for the Shifting Landscapes virtual tour with HGGHH has also expanded the project's public and scholarly impact. I'll let you take it away, Walter.
Thank you so much, Amy. Thank you to everyone at HGGHH and all of my collaborators. And I did notice so many of my colleagues in these fields and students that have learned from the site have joined us tonight. So I hope I will represent what they have done well. So my approach to Shifting Landscapes came out of my work in New Jersey, where I had done similar work for the Timothy Thomas Fortune Cultural Center, where it was a National Historic Landmark that had been allowed to languish. And we spent about a decade restoring the site and then creating a digital model that people could come and visit. Coming into Shifting Landscapes, I knew this was a task of a different order because of the number of scholars who are involved. And hello to my friend Neil, who has also joined us. Thank you, man. This work is based on a set of ideas that have grown over the last 20 years at the intersection of art, architecture, and history. In particular, the ideas of race, space, and place. And these ideas, the idea of what race is and how it evolves is one of the core topics of the understanding of the modern world. We've spent more than 2 centuries trying to get a handle around the concept and the way it is socially constructed and the different kinds of social construction of race that we encounter. New Orleans is an especially important place to engage that discussion. That as a space, a site of art and architecture, or a site of urban planning, New Orleans is vitally important to understanding the modern world. And then within that, the construction of places like the Hermann-Grima and Gallier houses. These are the lessons we must take into the remainder of this century and the next century. And that's exactly what we have attempted to do with the Shifting Landscapes virtual tour and exhibits. 2 works that shaped the way I tried to contribute to the different narratives involved on the site. are basically about comparative studies of urban enslavement. I work with Rick Gefkin in New Jersey about his book, The Stories of Slavery in New Jersey. Embedded within each of those chapters are ways of using the primary sources to understand space and place and the construction of race at different times in the 17th and 18th centuries. So I strongly recommend that. But even more impactfully, the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice has just completed their For Such a Time as This report that documents the history of enslavement in that state and goes through what has now become the historic Black History Trail in the state to talk about how do we do more work like shifting landscapes? How do we identify places and construct these virtual exhibits, these ways of engaging the past in a way that is both interactive and informative? The foundation for this work for me came from the National Endowment for the Humanities in 2015, led by Angel David Nieves, who has sadly passed away, and Kim Gallen, who is now at Brown University. There are two emerging projects that are complements to what we're doing in Shifting Landscapes. Justin Hosby has just published a new work on Angola Prison in Louisiana and the idea of Black ecologies. How does the presence of African Americans impact the actual environment, the natural or built environment? And so Hosby's work on Angola is extraordinary, and I encourage everyone to look at it. But much more recently, I was able to invite Lisette Acosta Corniel to Macalester College in memory, giving a memorial lecture for James Brewer Stewart, a pioneering scholar of American abolition. And Acosta Corniel studies the Dominican Republic in the 16th and 17th centuries. And her work on urbanization, and particularly the role of urban enslavement, is an extraordinary connection to what we do with Shifting Landscapes. There are no virtual exhibits of Santo Domingo, of Hispaniola, of Haiti, of the Dominican Republic. But those are the next steps forward. Those are the ways we take the work of Shifting Landscapes and really fulfill the promise of what New Orleans has always been as a transnational place, a place where people from dozens, if not hundreds of cultures come together over time and reshape how they see themselves and how they see their world. My work on those NEH projects, along with Justin and Lisette, was about the comparative urban enslavement in Liverpool, Montreal, Havana, Veracruz, New Orleans, Charleston, and Philadelphia, and Richmond, Virginia. And so this work has been ongoing for me about both the accurate history of enslavement in these places, but also how do we represent it visually? How do we give interactive digital access to these sites in ways that were not possible a decade ago or 2 decades ago? That evolution of the field of digital history is a revolution in the historical profession. It is changing the way that we convey the information beyond the textbook, beyond the monograph, beyond this journal or the scholarly article, to be able to bring advanced research into the embedded interactive environment is difficult enough. But then to go further with a website and to make it interactive and responsive in the ways that you all have seen tonight, that is another layer of craft and skill. And so this is the gift that the committee, the team has brought forward. And I want to emphasize it's incumbent on all of us to take this lesson forward and show more people how to do this work for community centers, for libraries, for schools, not just for the historic museums, not just for the wealthiest arts institutions in the world. How do we broaden access to the kinds of knowledge that we can uncover? And to this end, I want to share with you some of the work that students have begun to do with this. And so I'll start with the biggest project so far is my Wakanda syllabus. This is a set of sources about race and architecture, and it applies spatial analysis. And it's started to bear fruit. These are all peer-reviewed scholarly journal articles about the construction of Wakanda. But in particular, it's this work that then begins to change the idea of how we imagine Black space, how we see that in the origins of places like New Orleans, that is the syncretism, that is the originality that is shaping the future of global society. And so this happens in this particular instance with a video game. This is Marvel Rivals, that is taking the influences that we see in the Gallier House virtual exhibit and extrapolating them into the future. But much more importantly is this sense of the ideas and what we can do with them. How does this actually work in the classroom? And so I want to set the tone with a little bit of music. I'll stop with that because I want to show you that in my fall semester course on Black Music, Black History, we used the Gallier House and this virtual exhibit as a starting point for understanding the importance of New Orleans in the history of American music. And the students, one of their early assignments was to begin to recreate that history using laser cut models. And so you can see one example here. This is Mississippi River. And then trace over time. These are all representations of different sites where music history happened in New Orleans. They were required to begin with Jackson Square and then with Congo Square, which is now, of course, Louis Armstrong Park. But that work took lots of different shapes that basically focused on students' particular selections. This one is oriented a little differently, where Congo Square is here at the bottom and the river is at the top. But you see the ways that you're able to render what we've done with the Gallier House and look at the entire neighborhood to see it in connection with the larger histories of the region and the world. My last sample, is the most detailed. By using this map of the French Quarter and catching the moment where you start to show this, you can actually see multiple linguistic variations. You can see the sites that they're kind of identifying to talk about the different cultural influences that shape the city. And so this has brought the French Quarter to life and helped students come to a different set of conclusions about what they can know about the past by virtually exploring a site, but then physically creating new representations of the cities that we're studying. And so in this way, the French Quarter becomes a virtual city, a place that comes to life in different ways for young people that we hope will inspire and create different kinds of history moving forward. So thank you for a few minutes to talk about the work that I'm doing, and I'm so grateful for the chance to talk with all of you about this work.
Thank you, Walter. I know we were having some technical difficulties
Oh, my apologies.
seeing everything. That's okay. I didn't want to interrupt you because you were speaking so eloquently that I was like, we can.
I was going very fast. Should I try and show the map, or I can probably add the file to the chat?
Yeah, we could share a link later. But I do want to thank you to all your contributions to the project, and especially for always seeing the big picture with this project, championing its value as an educational resource, and always urging us to consider its afterlife. Your truly future-oriented approach to history brought a spirit of optimism to a project that often felt gargantuan. So thank you so much. Okay, finally, we will hear from Gaynell Brady, owner and educator, Our Mammy's LLC. Gaynell Brady advocates for the preservation of Louisiana's African American history and culture through her work as a historical interpreter. Since 2013, as owner and educator of Our Mammies LLC, she has led public programs exploring family history through the stories of her ancestors. Her past professional experience includes work with the National World War II Museum, the National Park Service's Jean Lafitte National Historic Park and Preserve, the New Orleans Jazz Historical Park, and the Louisiana State Museum. Gaynell holds a Bachelor of Arts in History and a Master of Arts in Museum Studies from Southern University at New Orleans. And with that, Gaynell, you can take it away.
Thank you, Amy. Um, I've been adjacent to Laurette's story for decades. And as a descendant of the enslaved in Louisiana, I have always been connected to the lives of enslaved women. From 2006 to 2019, I walked past the Gallier House often. I've actually visited the museum several times. Fast forward to 2022, I was asked to participate in a project with the Hermann-Grima and Gallier House museums. And as Amy mentioned earlier in her introduction, I participated in the International Coalition of Sites of Conscience addressing the Silences project with the museum staff. The purpose of the project was for the museum staff to reflect on how they can better engage with community partners. Throughout the project, we exchanged knowledge and best practices. The museum staff were able to develop a deeper community engagement model with me as their community partner. I learned open hearth cooking and historical recipes with Amy and the docents at the Hermann-Grima House. During my time at the Gallier House, I was able to explore the living quarters of the enslaved, especially Laurette's. It was at this moment I became drawn to her story. When I received the invitation to portray Laurette, I was overjoyed yet terrified. Typically, I only share stories about my ancestors, but this time was different. I had to read from a script that I did not create, and I did not descend from the person I was portraying. If you know me, you know I do not read from scripts. You also know that it's my life's mission to share my ancestors' stories. Yet I was up for the challenge and the opportunity. Everything felt off about my first round of recordings. We recorded in the back of the museum's gift shop. I was dressed comfortably in my early 1900s attire. I made so many mistakes. The first set of recordings is filled with bloopers. If you all can only watch them. I stumbled over simple words. I felt anxious, and I'm never anxious when I do this work. Something was off, and I could not put my finger on it. Amy and I recognized it felt rushed. I knew it was something deeper that we were missing. I actually left feeling disappointed in myself. After the meeting, we worked through several readings with the script. We talked, and I reflected. We made the words work for me. I stared at the photos of Laurette's room. I realized I did not complete one critical task. I did not get permission from the person I was portraying. I did not seek permission from Laurette first. If you know me, I felt horrible. I never want to disappoint my ancestors or anyone else's. During one of our meetings, Amy showed me a dress similar to the one that may have been worn by Laurette. I remembered I have a dress similar to Laurette's. I felt an ease entering my spirit. Y'all, I was gearing up for the task at hand. When I went back to the museum, I took some time to sit with Laurette. I needed some time to breathe. I needed some time to reflect in Laurette's space. She deserved my time and so much more. We had a moment. I can't share what that felt like, but some of the photos that Amy is pulling up can offer a glimpse of what we shared. After grace was given, my gift kicked in high gear. I was reminded of the resources I had. my dress, and my ability to give a voice to the ones silenced. I remembered Laurette's story is my ancestor's story. My ancestor Laura Brown's story is Laurette's story. Laurette's story is our story. She gave us all she had. She sacrificed everything. We owe her everything. More importantly, our time and our respect. This is what descendant community engagement and ethical memory work looks like at historical sites. Watch the videos, take the tour, and honor Laurette. Say their names while you explore the spaces. Take a moment to remember your ancestors and say their names too. Thank you.
Thank you, Gaynell. And we are going to try and share some of the one of the videos that we recorded together. I'm going to pull this up quickly. All right. Oh, apparently I have to install an audio device in order to do that. I am sorry. So y'all just have to visit the virtual tour in order to see those videos, but I promise you they're fantastic. And Gaynell and I just, really built this beautiful friendship through the process of making them. And Gaynell, I truly can't understate the importance of the way that you changed my thinking, not only on this project, but with how I engage with history work going forward. As Gaynell was going through her process of asking for permission to tell Laurette's story, she forced me to reckon with the fact that I had to move beyond my strictly intellectual engagement with this history into an emotional and spiritual engagement, and likewise ask permission. And that's a wisdom that I will bring with me wherever I go. Thank you so much, Gaynell. All right, I'd like to give another big thank you to all our panelists. If you want to turn your screens back on and your audio back on, we're going to open it up to the Q&A. Attendees, please put your questions in the Q&A tab. In some views, it might be difficult to find. You might need to expand your screen or go into the sort of more icon with the three dots, but it is in there. And it's an easier way to share your questions. I'm going to be passing them on to our team. We have about 15 minutes for questions, so it's going to be short and sweet. And I know we have a comment that someone dropped in there, which I can answer actually. They were asking if this recording of this event will be available for viewing later. Yes, it will. We are going to put this up on YouTube so that anyone that couldn't attend tonight can see this panel later. All right, we have another question. It says, thank you all for the beautiful presentations. How did you choose which objects to model? Katie, I'm going to hand that over to you.
Well, I mentioned this a little bit in my presentation, and it was a group effort. I can't say it was just me who chose them, but we really did have to work with the technology we had. That was the main first consideration, because if we were to photograph or 3D model any of the silver or super reflective gilt porcelain, that wouldn't have been able to be modeled, but that it wouldn't have worked. I can't explain the technology. That's if Dr. Carter were here, but it's really complicated. But I just know that for a fact. And but we do have a lot of those. I just want to make sure you know that those other things that we didn't capture 3D, we do have many more. Amy, what's the number of object? Do you know POI? We've got lots more that are
50 POIs. Not all of them are necessarily objects.
Yeah.
or some of them are parts of the architecture or just kind of ideas that we had to attach to something. I'd actually also like to open this one up to Leslie to speak about the
Yeah,
broader consideration of which objects, not just the 3D models, but we
right.
had a lot of discussions that Leslie had a lot to contribute to about how to choose what to focus on in this tour visually.
I was focusing on the 3D, sorry.
Well, it's so funny that you're asking me because I don't remember specifically what we were talking or debating about. But you know, it is a challenge to think about how to uh, pull up objects that enslaved people both would have interacted with, and Katie did a really good in her presentation mentioned this, that even when we're looking at these objects in the Gallier, you know, area of the house, that these are things that enslaved people would have interacted with constantly, and they just would have known all about them. And so you're sort of overwhelmed in a way by those objects and by the fact that the objects are owned by the Galliers and it's there for their comfort. But then when you turn to where the enslaved people, I hesitate to even say private because, of course, everything in that house is under the domination, really. It's owned by the Galliers, but those spaces where they had an opportunity perhaps to have things for themselves that were precious, we can see some of those objects. If you go into Laurette's room, there's a mirror, for example. So that indicates that she may have cared about her appearance, which we don't often think about in terms of enslaved people. But the other piece is that many of the objects, and this is true for working class people as well, and doubly true for enslaved people, that their objects aren't saved, that they may themselves be unable to save them. And certainly for most of the time that preservation was done, museums didn't really care about these objects. So we do, though, have from enslaved people their uh, narratives, the interviews with formerly enslaved people, and they will mention the items that they had that were precious to them or that were gifts to them. A fantastic book about this that's out, a more recent book, is Taya Miles' All That She Carried, which talks about an embroidered sack that a mother gave to her daughter as they were being sold apart, filled with just very simple things like a braid of hair, pecans. So I recommend that to everyone listening as an example of how we can think about the materials that enslaved people treasured as opposed to the materials that they had to take care of. But in a house like this, it's really important to know the labor that enslaved people provided for that home.
And just one more thing about, well, first of all, I wanted to say Gaynell's point about asking for permission. It's again, Leslie, like you said, it makes the job of doing this that much more important and more difficult because we are, like I said, we're using these to represent. So we have to really I'm a stickler for every little fact being, you know, correct, as my coworkers will tell you, except for when we don't have any material culture directly related to Laurette, then it's just, research and even there's oral histories that have come down through many generations. So, and the person who handles a lot of these objects, a lot of time I know how delicate many of them are, which ones need to be cleaned, and there is lots of labor associated with all of it. That's
And we're still waiting for more questions to come through. I guess folks are feeling a little bit shy, but I'll just add to that. My memory of our conversations, it was really, there was like a bigger methodological kind of conversation at play when we were first sitting down to come up with that list of items to focus on, because we have, first of all, the question of um, how do we tell a story that's about people in a tour with no people? Like, just hands down, that's a huge challenge. And so then we're telling the story of people through the story of objects and buildings. And we're also trying to tell the story of people who were treated as objects through other objects. So there's a bit of a trap there, right? And then the vast majority of objects in the house are these fancy objects, these objects of wealth, these objects of leisure. Um, and of course, we as historians have all kinds of ways we can interpret those objects to tell the story of enslavement. But one of the very important points that Leslie brought up continually was like, we need to think about sort of the gut level, like visual, physical reaction someone has entering this space in real life or on the virtual tour and being overwhelmed by like the glitz and the gold and the grandeur of it and getting distracted from the core message of the tour, which is to talk about enslavement and architecture and material culture. So we had to make a deliberate choice of like, okay, someone might not think there's a lot that's interesting to say about an iron. We all know what an iron is, but we're going to make sure we're talking about that and maybe be more selective with how many vases we're going to talk about, in a tour like this. And so we had to do a lot of back and forth as a team. And then, of course, we're all coming from different disciplines, and what one person sees as not having a significant story, someone else might be like, oh no, there's something really here. And so we had to be able to, communicate with each other and share that insight and come to a consensus about what to focus on. And that was like probably 50% of our work in content development as a team were just these big group discussions about what POIs to have, not what they were going to be about, not the editing, but just like which things are we going to highlight here in this house full of stuff. But it was definitely a pleasure to do that. All right. Next question here from Lewis Nelson, one of our collaborators. Thank you for adding this in. How do you imagine this content impacting the in-person tours? I'm going to throw this to Angel.
Hi, thanks, Lewis, and thanks for your consulting on this really amazing project. So there is part of the board in conjunction with the staff that is thinking in terms of reinterpreting Gallier House. And I would say that that is still an ongoing conversation about what that interpretation will entail. So I can't say anything too definitive. I don't want to, commit to one thing or another, when I'm not making the ultimate decisions. But I suppose I could say, as it is right now, one of the ways that I think it can impact the in-person tour. So there are a couple of things. One, as Amy was saying, first, if you can't come in person, this is an incredible opportunity to be able to really, kind of move through the space virtually. If you are able to come, then it's even more so, again, with that visceral sense. And what I think we want to do, and it's in that name, shifting landscapes, what we want to do is to help people to walk through a space and to see differently. And so as it is now, seeing the tour, getting the tour guide, but you're only going to scratch the surface of it. And so then having the option to go home and to interact with the objects and the rooms in a new way, it just gives you more depth. And especially, I'm always very passionate about educators and how educators can do this. And so, especially an educator who maybe goes on the trip with students and then is able to guide those students through the online process and to kind of go back and forth between, what did you experience bodily when you were in that space? What did it feel like to be underneath those stairs? What did it feel like to go up those back stairs? And then what did it feel like to go up those really opulent, beautiful stairs? Kind of getting that embodied experience and then going back and having lesson plans wrapped around all of the extraordinary scholarship that is in the online version. I think that will just be a kind of unparalleled experience for visitors, whether they're students or not.
Thank you, Angel. We have another question here about Gallier House. Is the restoration specific to the Gallier family or a more general upper class New Orleans family of that era? I think that's a good question for Katie to answer.
Hey, Dylan. So I mentioned before that this is a more representative, the collection of more representative, but we do have James Gallier Jr.'s inventory from his estate when he died in 1868. So that's something that was used and specifically for the house. And then we have household inventories from the French Quarter around this period, and then other family members. So that's what we've used to furnish the house. But that it's since the 70s. I mentioned that we do collect, but we actually don't. We're not an actively collecting institution. It's our mission really focuses on a few specific areas, and so that was done a long time ago. But anything related to these families and the experience in this location, we will look at. So.
Thank you, Katie. I have another question here. This person is asking, it would be wonderful to learn more about how you did this work and how you got the money to do it. Big question, but I think it is worth talking about just how much planning and scope goes into a project like this. Walter, I'm going to throw this to you just to get everyone talking at some point.
Yeah, no, it's a very different environment than it was 5 years ago, thinking about this kind of work. I have to start on the down note that the Office of Digital Humanities, as part of the National Endowment for the Humanities, has been eliminated. And so a lot of the kinds of lawsuits, I think the IMLS funding was able to get restored through a lawsuit. But the notion of doing really innovative historical projects like this is a threat to a number of people. And particularly being in New Orleans, being in Louisiana, there are additional hurdles that we have to convince people who are skeptical or who are just downright opposed to doing this kind of work. To place Lorette's story at the center of the narrative, there's a really determined effort to not hear Black women's history and to stop efforts to do the work. So, if we need to push back against that, I live in St. Paul, Minnesota. I have spent the last 3 months doing community defense work because of really direct action by our government. And so that is all a part of the same tapestry for me, is the honor of being able to be in a conversation like this and build a project like Shifting Landscapes is just another part of doing the same work of protecting my neighbors and trying to make sure the kids I know are safe going to school. We don't get to pick and choose which battles we want to take on in any given moment. But I felt very lucky to be surrounded with you all in this time to try and do the best work we can to move forward together and overcome people who do not value hearing new insights and gaining the kind of access to rare primary sources that, everyone here has given so much of their life to. Oh, the high point is there are funding organizations that are fighting back for this. Mellon Foundation at the absolute front of this. And so I was honored and amazed to see a distinguished colleague, David Levering Lewis, just gave $1 million gift to advance the study of rare biography so that it moves forward. I think this is part of the Graduate Center at CUNY in New York. And so, yes, people are fighting back in really strategic and quite powerful ways. And so we are a river. They will never stop us and block us from doing this. Right. It's just a question of how we move around the edge. How do we adapt and continue to grow the funding that we have? I will also say, particularly because I'm at a really small college, I've been thrilled in the last 6 months. We've raised $5 million to preserve both Asian history and to preserve the study of abolition, and to teach students how to do this work through public history and community. And so if folks have concerns about finding funds and figuring out the next path, please just reach out. Anybody here can help you find ways to do the work that we need to do.
All right. Well, we are past 7:30 at this point. We still have a lot of great questions, but unfortunately, we're gonna need to sign off. Thank you all so much. Thank you all on the panel. Thank you all on the team. Thank you to the audience, everyone that came to this project, their inspiring work on the Shifting Landscapes virtual tour. Every one of you brought so much knowledge, insight, and wisdom to this work and have changed both myself and our museum for the better in the process. Thank you to our audience for your support of our museum tonight and ongoingly. A little bit of housekeeping before we go. For those who are in New Orleans, I'd like to let you know about another upcoming program that we have next week. It's going to be in person at Gallier House as part of our Gallier Gathering lecture and reading series. The program, entitled Here and Someplace Else, will feature Louisiana Poet Laureate Gina Ferrara, who will be reading her work and discussing the role of place in poetry. This is another free event, and registration is up on Eventbrite, same place you signed up for this one. More information is on our website at hgghh.org. Thank you once again to all of the panelists, and we look forward to seeing you, our audience, at our future in-person and virtual programs. All right, thank you, everyone, and good night.